I cleared my in-laws' debt, then my husband confessed his affair, and now he wants to live with her. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone.
I never imagined my life could change in just one night. I mean, one moment, I was living what I thought was a safe, happy life, and the next, everything I believed was shattered. It all began when I made a choice I thought was right, something I never told anyone, not even my closest friends. I paid off my in-laws' debts. All of it. Every last cent. I worked overtime, skipped meals, borrowed money, just to see the weight lifted from their shoulders. I thought it would bring peace to my marriage. I thought my husband would be grateful. I thought it would make things better. But I was wrong. That evening, after I handed over the last payment, he didn't smile. He didn't hug me. He just sat there quietly, looking at his phone. I thought he was tired. I thought maybe he was relieved. But then he turned to me and said something I'll never forget. His voice was low, almost trembling. "Alec, I need to tell you something." And my heart stopped. I knew it wasn't good. The way he said it was like he was holding something dangerous in his chest, something that could destroy us. I waited. My hands were trembling, and I could feel my breath getting short. He looked away for a moment, then back at me. "I've been seeing someone." Just like that, the words fell out. Simple, heavy, cutting. Seeing someone, not once or twice, for months. A secret that had been living in the shadows of our home. I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. Everything I'd believed about our life felt like it was crumbling into dust. I wanted to scream, to ask why, but I didn't. Instead, I just stared at him. My mind was racing. Was it my fault? Did he hate me for paying the debt? Was that why he was telling me this now? The silence between us was loud. My chest hurt. My hands shook. And then he said something that froze me even more. "Alec, I want to live with her." Those words cut deeper though, than anything else. Not just because of what they meant, but because they weren't said in anger. They were said with calm certainty, like he'd been thinking about it for a long time. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just sat there, my heart pounding, trying to understand if I was dreaming, or if this was the cruelest reality I had ever faced. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the kind of betrayal that twists your whole world. I had done everything, worked hard, sacrificed, given all I could, and it wasn't enough. I couldn't stop asking myself, had I been living with a stranger this whole time without knowing? My mind kept circling back to that night, that moment when he told me, and I knew my life would never be the same. Before this, I thought I knew him. I thought I knew our life together. But now, I didn't even know who he was. And what scared me the most was not just that he wanted to leave me, but the way he said it. Like it was something I should understand. Like it was his right. So here I am, sitting in the quiet of our home, heartbroken, wondering if anyone else has ever felt the way I do right now. Alone in my pain, wondering if the sacrifices we make for love are ever really enough. And that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I asked myself the one question I can't escape. How could someone you trusted completely decide to destroy everything you've built together? I know this story sounds like something out of a drama, But it's real, and it's mine, and it's only the beginning. Because what happened next was even worse. I woke up the next morning feeling hollow. The air in our bedroom felt heavy, as if it was holding the weight of his words. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. I want to live with her. Those words wouldn't leave me. My mind kept twisting them, trying to understand. Was it about her? Or Abby? Out me? I couldn't breathe without the thought of it cutting deeper into my chest. I tried to pretend, even to myself, that life could go back to normal. I went about my day as usual, making breakfast, tidying the house, checking emails. But every sound, every shadow felt wrong. My husband moved around the house quietly, like someone trying to avoid being noticed. No conversation, no eye contact. It felt like we were living in two separate worlds under the same roof. Before this, life wasn't perfect, but we had a rhythm. I knew his habits, his jokes, his silences. We shared dreams, worries, little routines that made life ours. Now it was all gone. He was a stranger who once shared my bed, my hopes, my life, and I couldn't understand why. I kept asking myself if I'd missed signs. Were there moments I overlooked? Times when his eyes wandered, or he became distant? My mind started going through every detail of our last year together. Was it when he spent more nights at work? When his phone was always locked? When he stopped laughing at my jokes? Every little moment now felt like a clue to a mystery I was desperate to solve. By the evening, I found myself in the living room, staring at his chair across the room. He wasn't there. My heart was pounding. I didn't know if it was grief or anger, or maybe both. Then I heard the door click softly. He came in, not looking at me, carrying a bag. Without saying a word, he left again. It was like he was carrying pieces of himself away. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the dark ceiling. My mind was racing. I wanted answers. I needed them. I felt a storm building inside me. Anger, sadness, confusion, betrayal, all mixing into one heavy feeling I couldn't name. I remembered every sacrifice I'd made, every moment I'd given for him and his family, and I couldn't understand how he could just walk away without explanation. The next few days were worse. Every conversation was a battle of silence. The house felt colder. I started noticing little things, how his coffee mug was always empty, how his shoes stayed by the door, how he barely touched his phone except to check messages late at night. And then came the calls. I didn't hear the words, but I knew enough from his expression when he spoke to someone privately. My chest sank every time I realized it was her. I began to feel trapped in my own home. Every room, every corner seemed to whisper the same painful truth. My life was no longer my own. My heart kept asking the same question over and over. Why? Why now? Why after everything I did for him? Was this really about her? Or had I simply never been enough? I remember one night, sitting alone in our bedroom, tears rolling down my cheeks, whispering to myself, I gave everything. I gave my heart. And this is what I get? It wasn't just sadness. It was disbelief. It was a kind of hurt so deep that it felt like it would never go away. A week later, he came home earlier than usual. I was in the kitchen, making dinner. I heard the front door close softly, then footsteps approaching. My heart clenched. I tried to focus on cooking, pretending not to notice him standing there. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but certain. Alec, we need to talk. My hands froze. My breath caught. I set the spoon down, turning to face him. There was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Something final. Not anger, not sadness, but certainty. The kind that doesn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't sit down. He just looked at me and said, "I'm moving out. I've made my decision. I want to be with her." I stared at him, unable to speak. My chest felt tight, my thoughts scattered. The world seemed to stop in that moment. Every sound in the house faded, except his words. "I want to be with her." It felt like someone had taken my life and rewritten it without my consent. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about him and me anymore. This was about everything I'd ever sacrificed. Every moment I thought counted. My whole world had shifted, and I didn't know if I could find my way back. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring out into the darkness, listening to the faint sounds of the city. My heart felt heavy, and my mind was full of questions I had no answers to. I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of a story that was far from over. Because what happened next would change everything. The next morning felt colder than usual. I woke up to silence. No footsteps, no voices. The air felt heavier, like the weight of the night before hadn't lifted. My hand still shook from the shock of his words. He was gone. Not just out of the bedroom, but out of my life. Or at least, out of the version of life I thought we shared. I walked through the house, touching the places that still held his presence. His jacket hanging by the door, the mug he left in the kitchen, the book he always read at night. Everything felt different. Not broken exactly, but unfinished. As if someone had stopped telling the story halfway. The days that followed were filled with a strange kind of pain I hadn't known before. Pain that wasn't loud, but quiet, creeping in between every thought. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way his side of the bed stayed untouched. The way our shared photos seemed to look back at me with questions. I kept trying to reach him, to call him, to find a moment to talk, but every time I tried, he shut me out. I began to see his absence more clearly. It wasn't just physical. He wasn't present in the home we'd built together. It was as if he had already started living somewhere else, somewhere without me. And then I heard about her. Not directly, but through whispers, the sound of her name in hushed tones when he thought I wasn't listening. My stomach twisted every time I heard it. My head screamed for answers, but my heart was terrified of what those answers would be. One evening, I decided I couldn't stand it anymore. I left the house, without telling him where I was going. I wandered aimlessly, the streets dark and quiet under the glow of streetlights. My mind replayed the moments of our life together, the laughter, the fights, the dreams. Everything felt like a memory stolen from me. I found myself at a small cafe I used to visit alone, the one he never came to. I ordered coffee, sat by the window, and just watched people pass by. Strangers smiled at each other, couples held hands, and somewhere far away, life moved on without me. I realized then that I was trying to stitch together pieces of a life that no longer existed. That night, I got a message on my phone. It was from him. Just 3 words. "We need to talk." My heart raced. My mind froze. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. Did I want to hear him? Did I want to know? But deep down, I knew I had to. When I got home, the door was slightly open. I stepped in carefully, heart pounding. The house was quiet. I called his name softly. No answer. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. I moved toward the living room and froze. There he was, sitting with his head in his hands. The bag he'd packed sat beside him. He looked up slowly, eyes tired, but filled with something I couldn't name. He didn't speak at first. I stood there, unsure if I should go closer or turn away. Then he said, "Alec, I've made a mistake, but I can't stop this now." His words hit me like a punch. Mistake? This wasn't a mistake. This was a decision, a choice. And the choice had been made without me. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand answers, but instead, I sat across from him in silence, letting the heaviness of his words sink in. I could feel my heart breaking in ways I never thought possible. For days after, I lived in a blur. I went through my routine mechanically, avoiding mirrors because I didn't want to face the reflection of the person I had become. I stopped asking questions out loud. My mind was full of them anyway, questions without answers. Then came the moment that changed everything again. I was sitting in the kitchen when I heard a faint knock on the door. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then it came again. Softer this time, deliberate. I walked over, my heart pounding, and opened it to find a woman standing there. She looked young, nervous, but with eyes that held something I couldn't place. She spoke softly, almost hesitantly. "Alec, I'm sorry." Her words pierced me, not because they were an apology, but because they confirmed everything I had feared. She was her, the other woman, the one he wanted to live with. I stepped back, unable to speak. My mind was racing. Was this her way of saying she wanted to end it? Or was it her way of starting something new, without me? She held my gaze for a moment, then looked away. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said, "but I can't stop it now." Her voice trembled. I wanted to ask her how she could do this, how she could take something so precious and break it without warning. But I didn't. Instead, I closed the door gently, as if the sound of it shutting could stop the pain that was spreading in my chest. That night, I lay awake thinking about everything. His words, her apology, the life I thought I had. I realized then that this wasn't just about a broken marriage. This was about betrayal in its rawest form, about promises shattered and trust torn apart. And in the silence of my room, I made a decision. I would not disappear quietly into the night of his choices. I would find my own way out of this storm. But I knew it wouldn't be easy, because this story, my story, was far from over. The next day, I began to dig deeper. I needed to understand the truth. I started paying attention to every detail. His habits, her presence, the moments he left without explanation. Every clue felt like a piece of a puzzle that I was desperate to solve. And as the days went by, the tension in the house grew unbearable. Every glance, every silence between us became heavier. I knew something big was coming, something that would change everything. But I didn't know if I was ready for it. Because what I was about to discover would turn my world upside down completely. The morning light came like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. I woke to the sound of my own breath, shaky, uneven, as if the air itself was too heavy to hold. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from him. "We need to talk. Now." I didn't answer. I didn't want to hear his voice. But something deep inside me pushed me to get up, to face whatever storm was coming. I left the house without looking back, My heart pounding with a mixture of fear and dread. I found him sitting in the cafe where we had our first date. He wasn't alone. She was there too. The other woman. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with guilt and something I couldn't quite read. I stood frozen at the doorway, watching them talk quietly, leaning close. It felt like my entire world had been erased, replaced with a scene from a nightmare. I stepped inside. The air between us shifted. The moment he saw me, his eyes widened. He stood, but didn't come closer. I felt the urge to yell, to demand an explanation, but my voice failed me. She looked up at me, and her lips parted, as if she wanted to speak, but the words caught somewhere in her throat. The silence was unbearable. I sat down across from them, my hands gripping the table so tightly they hurt. Then he spoke. "Alec, I'm sorry. I never wanted it to go this far." His words sounded hollow. I wanted to ask him how far was too far. I wanted to tell him that what he had done wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal that cut through the soul. She spoke then, her voice trembling. "Alec, I didn't know. I didn't know he was married. I thought..." "I don't want to hear it," I interrupted, my voice sharp. My throat burned. "This isn't just about mistakes. This is about choices." They both looked at me, silence stretching between us like a wound.
My mind was racing, each thought sharper than the last. Every moment of our life together replayed. His promises, the dreams we shared, the nights I stayed awake worrying about him. And all of it felt like it had been erased. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "You've destroyed everything," I said. My voice cracked, but I couldn't stop. "Do you even understand what you've done? You don't just betray a person. You destroy their sense of trust, their home, their future." He looked down. I could see the shame there. But I also saw something else. Something I didn't want to name. Regret. She reached out, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said firmly. "You've said enough." For a long moment, none of us spoke. The cafe noise faded into background hum. All I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My mind was screaming, but my body felt numb. Then he said something I'll never forget. "I want to be with her. I can't lie anymore. Alec, I'm leaving." The words hit me like a storm. Leaving. For her. Not for us. Not for a second chance. For her. My chest tightened, and I felt something break inside me. I wanted to collapse, to scream, to cry, but instead, I just sat there, staring at him, trying to understand how someone could choose another person over everything they once had. She looked at him, then at me, her eyes wet. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. But her apology felt meaningless in the face of what had just happened. I stood up again. My legs felt like lead, my mind spinning. I walked out of that cafe without another word. The door closed behind me with a sound that echoed like the closing of a chapter I wasn't ready to accept. Outside, the air was cold, but my skin burned. I wandered the streets without direction. Every step felt heavy, like the ground was pulling me down. My mind kept replaying his words. "I'm leaving." They weren't it, just words. They were a sentence, one that condemned our life together. I went to the park where we used to walk in the evenings. The place was quiet, the benches empty. I sat on one, staring at the ground, trying to hold back the flood of emotions.
anger, sadness, betrayal, grief. They all mixed together, sharp and heavy. I remembered the first time he told me he loved me, how his voice had been full of warmth, how I had believed him with all my heart. And now, that belief lay in pieces at my feet. I stayed there for hours, letting the tears fall without shame, because in that moment, I realized something. This was no longer just about him or her. This was about me, about who I was going to be after everything had fallen apart. When I finally got up, I felt a strange clarity. The storm inside me was still raging, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let this betrayal define me. I would rebuild, not for him, not for her, but for myself. But I also knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, because this wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a fight to reclaim my life. And I wasn't ready to lose that fight. I walked home that evening under a sky bruised with twilight. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself was carrying the weight of everything that had happened. My mind replayed the cafe scene, his words, her face, the silence that had broken something inside me. It wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about trust, about dignity, about the pieces of myself I had lost along the way. When I opened the door to our home, it was quiet. Too quiet. The walls seemed to echo with the absence of his voice, of laughter we once shared, of dreams we once built together. I dropped my bag and slid to the floor, letting the tears come without restraint. I didn't want to hold them back anymore. I let myself feel the full weight of grief, of loss, of anger that burned sharp and deep. That night, I sat by the window, staring into the darkness, asking myself a question that wouldn't leave me. How could someone who once promised forever choose to walk away? And why did it feel like my whole life had been written over without my consent? But somewhere in the pain, I found something else. A flicker of strength. I realized this wasn't the end of my story. It was a chapter, yes, but not the whole book. I could let this break me, or I could let it make me stronger. The days that followed were hard. There were mornings I woke with the weight of betrayal pressing against my chest so heavily I could barely breathe. There were moments when I wanted to call him, to beg for answers, to demand what I thought I deserved. But I never did. I learned that some answers aren't meant to come, and some closures must be found within ourselves. I started to write again. At first, the words were jagged and raw, pouring from a place of hurt. But slowly, they became something different. A record of survival, a map of healing. I wrote about the pain, about the betrayal, but also about what I learned. That self-respect is a quiet but powerful force, and forgiveness doesn't always mean returning to someone who hurt you. Sometimes, it means freeing yourself. Friends came to check on me. Some offered comfort, others offered advice. But what I needed most was space to rebuild, space to find myself again without his shadow hanging over me. I began to understand that life moves forward, whether we want it to or not. We either walk with it or stay buried in what has been lost. Months later, I visited that same park where I had sat after the confrontation. The bench where I cried felt different now, less like a wound and more like a place where I had begun to heal. I sat there, breathing in the crisp air, and I realized that pain had taught me something important, that I was not the sum of someone else's choices. I was my own person, with the power to decide what came next. Looking back now, I see that betrayal was not just the end of a relationship. It was a turning point. It forced me to look deeper at who I was, at what I valued, and at how much strength I truly had inside me. And I found that strength, not in revenge, not in anger, but in the quiet resolve to take my life back into my own hands. So here I stand today, not as someone broken, but as someone who has learned to rise again. I have learned that endings are not always failures. Sometimes they are beginnings disguised in heartbreak. And now, I ask you, how would you stand if someone you trusted the most walked away? Would you crumble, or would you rise? Because the truth is, life will give you moments that test everything. Your heart, your trust, your sense of self. And how you respond to them will define who you become. I will not pretend it was easy. It still hurts sometimes. But I know this. I am no longer defined by what he took from me. I am defined by what I choose to build for myself. And that choice is mine.